The Stuart Highway cuts 3,000 kilometres straight through the heart of Australia, connecting Darwin in the tropical north to Port Augusta on the southern coast. Most travellers see it as just another road, a ribbon of asphalt through endless red dirt and scrub. But scattered along this highway are 17 towns that locals warn you about in hushed conversations. Towns where petrol stations sit abandoned mid-shift, entire streets empty at dusk, and travellers who ignore the warnings sometimes don't make it to the next fuel stop. Today we're driving the full length from north to south, and I'm going to show you exactly why seasoned road trippers keep their foot hard on the accelerator through these 17 locations. Before we begin, you need to understand something about the Stuart Highway. This isn't your comfortable coastal tourist route. You can drive for 200 kilometres without seeing another vehicle. Mobile reception drops out for hours at a time. The nearest hospital might be 4 hours away in either direction. When something goes wrong out here, you're completely on your own. That isolation is precisely what makes these towns so deeply unsettling. They exist far enough from civilization that normal rules don't quite apply, but there's still someone always watching from behind dusty windows when you pull over. Number 1. Adelaide River, Northern Territory, population 70. 115 kilometres south of Darwin, the town has a war cemetery commemorating 1,942 Japanese air raid victims. But behind the old railway station sits unmarked ground where 1890s railway construction workers were buried. Deaths from heat stroke, snakebite, accidents never investigated. No headstones, just shallow depressions in red earth that locals avoid after dark. Campers near the station report digging sounds at night and fresh-turned earth smell by morning, though the ground shows no disturbance. The Adelaide River Inn operates, but the owner warns against wandering behind the station after sunset. Number 2. Pine Creek, Northern Territory, population 430. This 1870s gold rush town looks picturesque with its heritage buildings and historic railway station. But Pine Creek has a serious problem it doesn't advertise to tourists. The town's water supply comes from old mine shafts never properly sealed when the gold ran out. Several times yearly, tap water runs rust red. Locals boil it for 20 minutes before drinking. Chemical analysis shows trace mercury and arsenic from century-old mining operations seeping into groundwater. Population declining for decades. Many citing unexplained health issues doctors can't diagnose. Headaches that won't quit, skin rashes without cause, children developing behavioural problems, parents swear, started after moving here. Town council insists water meets safety standards, but anyone living here 5+ years drinks only bottled water. At the Lazy Lizard Tavern, you can see regulars with that yellowish eye tint from long-term heavy metal exposure. Number 3. Larrimah, Northern Territory, population 11. When Paddy Moriarty and his dog vanished in 2017, no trace was found despite exhaustive searches. The investigation remains open. Larrimah sits in an acoustic anomaly, where sound behaves strangely. Voices from houses 200 metres away sound like they're beside you. Everyone knows everyone's business. Social dynamics are vicious. Residents openly feuded. When Paddy vanished, 5 of the remaining 10 residents were persons of interest. The Pink Panther pub closed in 2017. Truck drivers who knew Paddy refused to stop here. The town feels like barely suppressed violence, everyone waiting for the next disappearance. Number 4. Daly Waters, Northern Territory, population 23. The pub is famous, covered in business cards and currency from around the world. Travellers stop for kitsch and cold beer. But the town was an aviation staging post, and in the 1930s, several pilots vanished between airstrips. Planes never found. Since then, locals report lights moving in ways aircraft shouldn't. Lights following old flight paths, appearing and disappearing where planes lost radio contact. Pub owner jokes about it. Cattle station workers 20 kilometres out don't joke. They've seen herds spooked overhead, stampeding at night without explanation. Station hands quit after witnessing this, refusing night shifts. The pub stays loud until late because nobody wants outside after closing. Number 5. Newcastle Waters, Northern Territory, population 54. Once crucial to cattle droving, tens of thousands of cattle passed through yearly in the early 1900s. Not all stockmen made it to the next town. Heat exhaustion, falls, violent disputes meant bodies buried in shallow graves marked by stone piles. In 2008, construction workers uncovered human remains beneath 3 buildings, too old to determine cause of death, quietly reburied with no names. Since then, residents report a figure on horseback at dusk, visible seconds before vanishing. Always the same figure, heading south on the old stock route. The local mechanic's dashcam captured this, and he stopped trying to explain it. Number 6. Tennant Creek, Northern Territory. Population 3,200. Largest town on this list with supermarket and hospital, but size doesn't equal safety. One of Australia's highest crime rates. Severe alcohol problem from mining boom-bust cycles, leaving residents unemployed and desperate. Assaults common enough that hospital staff predict busy nights by welfare payment schedules. Beyond crime, Tennant Creek sits on an Aboriginal ceremonial site. Construction disturbed areas, traditional owners warned against touching. Several buildings abandoned because workers refused entry. Cold spots in 40-degree heat. Shadows in empty rooms. Chanting in unknown languages. Police officers refuse night shifts in certain station sections. Number 7. Wycliffe Well, Northern Territory. Population 2. This town bills itself as Australia's UFO capital, and the roadhouse is decorated with alien-themed murals and displays of alleged sighting reports. It seems like a tourist gimmick until you spend a night here. Wycliffe Well sits near a restricted military area, and the night sky above the town sees unusual activity that has never been officially explained. Travellers camping at the Roadhouse Caravan Park regularly report seeing structured lights performing manoeuvres that conventional aircraft cannot. These aren't distant stars or satellites. These are large, bright objects moving at speeds and angles that defy normal physics, sometimes hovering directly overhead before accelerating out of sight in seconds. The roadhouse owners have stopped trying to explain it. They just tell you to look up after 10 at night and judge for yourself. What makes it creepy isn't the lights themselves, it's the reaction of the military. On several occasions, helicopters have arrived within 30 minutes of a major sighting, circling the area with searchlights. Nobody from the Defence Department has ever explained what they're looking for. Several travellers have reported being followed by unmarked vehicles after leaving Wycliffe, well, tailed for 50 or 60 kilometres before the vehicle turns back. Number 8. Barrow Creek, Northern Territory. Population 11, where British backpacker Peter Falconio was murdered in 2001, but the dark history predates this. The hotel sits near the 1,874 Telegraph Station attack site, where Aboriginal warriors killed 2 operators in retaliation for frontier violence. The hotel memorial lists settlers and police killed, but no corresponding memorial for Aboriginal people killed in punitive expeditions. Heavy atmosphere, violence layered on violence across 150 years. Staff report glasses shattering untouched, doors slamming in empty buildings, recurring smoke smell despite no fires. Travellers stop for fuel but refuse to stay longer. The outback around Barrow Creek has abandoned vehicles that locals say still had petrol when found. Their drivers vanished. Number 9. Tea Tree, Northern Territory. Population 200. Services, cattle stations and Aboriginal communities. Standard outback town on the surface. But the roadhouse has been rebuilt 3 times since the 70s because staff refuse night shifts. Operates 24 hours. But between 2 and 6 a.m, strange things happen consistently. Refrigeration units shut down despite backup generators. Stockroom lights flicker deliberately. Customers feel watched from darkness beyond fuel pumps. 2 managers quit without explanation. Current owner installed casino-level security cameras. Cameras capture anomalies. Objects moving on shelves with no one near. Shadows crossing empty aisles. A figure in the stockroom corner vanishing when approached. Owner keeps footage locked. Shows it only to staff needing convincing to stay. If you're finding this valuable, hit subscribe. I cover Australia's darkest places weekly. Number 10. Aileron, Northern Territory. Population 5. Known for a 16-metre statue of an Aboriginal man called Unsettling Man. Impressive roadside attraction where travellers stop for photos. But built in 2005 without traditional owner consultation, placed on culturally significant land. Aboriginal elders said publicly the statue was built wrong, there would be consequences. Since then, Aileron has had persistent problems. Roadhouse changed owners 4 times in 18 years, citing financial troubles, But travellers don't stay. They photograph and leave immediately, feeling unwelcome despite friendly staff. Half empty most nights, despite being one of few fuel stops in 200 kilometres. Local workers say the area feels wrong at dawn and dusk when sun hits certain angles. The shadow seems too long, too dark. People photograph the statue, finding strange distortions, blurred sections, colour shifts, background shapes not visible when shot. Number 11. Alice Springs, Northern Territory. Population 25,000. The only actual city on the Stuart Highway, big enough for shopping centres and suburbs. But Alice Springs has severe social problems, making it one of Australia's most unsettling urban areas. Entrenched poverty, substance abuse, violent crime rates spiking regularly. The dry Todd River bed becomes a gathering place for displaced people. Tourists warned against walking alone in certain areas after dark. Beyond social dysfunction, Alice Springs has geographical unease, surrounded by McDonnell Ranges, creating an amphitheatre effect, trapping heat and sound. At night, the town feels enclosed, claustrophobic, despite being in a vast desert. Several town centre buildings, including a former hostel and abandoned shopping complex, have reputations for being haunted. Security guards working night shifts report footsteps on empty floors, voices in stairwells, a pervasive feeling of being followed. The town's tourist industry focuses on natural beauty, but locals know Alice Springs after dark is where you lock doors and don't make eye contact with strangers. Number 12. Erldunda, Northern Territory. Population 5. This roadhouse sits at the Stuart and Lassiter Highway junction, the route to Uluru. Should be thriving, catching tourists heading to the Rock. Instead, travellers stop only to refuel, surrounded by flat, empty land in every direction. No trees, no hills, just spinifex and red dirt to the horizon. That openness should feel liberating, but creates a sensation of being exposed, visible to something watching from great distance. Roadhouse staff report seeing figures standing far in the scrub, too far for details, but clearly human-shaped and motionless. These figures appear at irregular intervals, sometimes visible for hours before vanishing. Nobody walks out to investigate. Police calls about suspicious persons go nowhere, because by the time officers arrive, figures are gone. The manager believes these are Aboriginal people observing from a distance, but traditional owners say they don't know who these figures are and avoid Erldunda themselves for reasons they won't fully explain. Number 13. Kulgera, Northern Territory. Population 4. This tiny settlement sits just north of the South Australia border, marking the transition from the Northern Territory's red deserts into South Australia's salt pans. The roadhouse here is basic, fuel and minimal supplies, and it has the distinction of being one of the least visited stops on the Stuart Highway. Travellers tend to push through to Coober Pedy instead. The reason becomes obvious if you stop after dark. Kulgera sits in a low area where fog forms on cold nights, rolling in from the salt pans to the south. This fog is unnaturally thick, reducing visibility to a few metres, and it carries a chemical smell that locals say comes from the salt flats. But several travellers who've been caught in the Kulgera fog report something stranger. The fog seems to distort sound, swallowing voices and engine noise, creating a bubble of silence that feels oppressive. And in that silence, people report hearing other sounds. Footsteps crunching on gravel, breathing that doesn't match their own, and occasionally, a voice calling from somewhere in the fog. The voice always calls a name. Sometimes a name the traveller recognises, sometimes not. Those who follow the voice find nothing but empty road. The roadhouse operator keeps floodlights on all night to push back the fog, but on particularly thick nights, the lights barely penetrate 10 metres. Number 14. Coober Pedy, South Australia. Population 1,700. This opal mining town is famous for its underground homes, dug into the hillsides to escape the brutal summer heat. It's a tourist attraction, with shops and museums showcasing the town's mining history. But Coober Pedy has a dark side that locals don't advertise. The town is surrounded by thousands of abandoned mine shafts, many unmarked, many unstable. People have fallen into these shafts and died, their bodies not recovered for days or weeks because nobody knew where to look. The town has a casual relationship with danger. Explosives are common, used for mining, and the sound of detonations echoes through the hills regularly. But some of those booms aren't from mining. The town has a significant criminal element, people who come to Coober Pedy to disappear, and disputes are sometimes settled with more than fists. The police presence is minimal, and the outback around Coober Pedy is vast enough that bodies could be hidden and never found. Several long-term residents have vanished over the years, their disappearances explained away as people deciding to move on. But their families tell different stories. Stories of threats and debts and last phone calls that ended abruptly. The underground homes that make Coober Pedy unique also make it a place where you can scream and nobody will hear you. Number 15. Glendambo, South Australia. Population 25. This town exists for one purpose: servicing travellers on the Stuart Highway. There's a roadhouse, a motel, and a caravan park, and nothing else. The town sits in the middle of a plain, so flat and featureless that it disorients people. Travellers who stop at Glendambo often report feeling lost, even though the highway runs straight through town and the next settlement is clearly signposted. The motel has a reputation among truck drivers for being the place where you have vivid, unsettling dreams. Multiple drivers have reported the same dream: walking out into the plain behind the motel and finding a town that shouldn't be there. A town with empty buildings and streets, but no people, just the sense of being observed from windows. The dream always ends the same way, with the dreamer realizing they can't find their way back to the highway and waking up in a panic. The motel staff have heard these stories enough times that they don't dismiss them anymore. They just advise guests not to walk out into the scrub behind the motel after dark. The plain is disorienting enough in daylight, and at night, it's easy to lose your bearings and wander in circles, your torch beam swallowed by the vast emptiness. Number 16. Pimba, South Australia. Population 5. This town is small, even by Outback standards, just a roadhouse and a few scattered buildings. But Pimba sits uncomfortably close to the Woomera Prohibited Area, a massive restricted zone used for military testing. The prohibited area covers more than 122,000 square kilometres, and unauthorised entry is illegal. Travellers passing through Pimba sometimes see military vehicles on the side roads, and occasionally, aircraft that don't appear on civilian flight trackers pass overhead. The roadhouse staff are tight-lipped about what goes on at Woomera, but they'll tell you that when tests are happening, the ground shakes and the windows rattle. What makes Pimba creepy is the juxtaposition: a tiny civilian settlement pressed up against a zone where the Australian military and foreign defence contractors test weapons and surveillance systems that the public never hears about. Several travellers have reported being stopped by military police after taking photos near Pimba, their cameras confiscated and images deleted. The roadhouse has a sign warning travellers not to leave the highway or attempt to access the prohibited area, and locals will tell you stories of people who ignored that warning and were arrested, held for questioning, and released hours later with no memory of what happened during that time. Number 17. Port Augusta, South Australia. Population 13,500. This is where the Stuart Highway officially ends, merging into the coastal highway system. Port Augusta is a proper town with infrastructure and services, but it has a grim reputation. The town's economy collapsed when the coal-fired power station closed and unemployment spiked. The social problems that followed, substance abuse, domestic violence, and youth crime, have made Port Augusta one of the most troubled regional centres in South Australia. The town sits at the top of Spencer Gulf, and the industrial wasteland of the old power station dominates the skyline. At night, the derelict station is a hulking shadow, its cooling towers visible for kilometres. Several break-ins at the abandoned site have ended badly, with intruders falling from heights or getting trapped in flooded basements. The station is fenced off now, but locals report lights inside the buildings at night, flickering in windows that should have no power. Security patrols have investigated and found nothing, but the lights keep appearing. Port Augusta feels like a town that's given up, and the atmosphere of defeat is palpable. Travellers who've driven the full length of the Stuart Highway often describe Port Augusta as the most depressing place on the route, a town that feels like the end of something. So there you have it. 17 towns on the Stuart Highway where something feels fundamentally wrong. Some of these places are dangerous because of crime or isolation. Others are unsettling because of their histories, the violence and death that's soaked into the red dirt over more than a century. And a few have things happening that don't have rational explanations. The Stuart Highway is a vital transport route, and thousands of people drive it every year without incident. But the locals in these 17 towns know things that road maps don't show. They know which buildings to avoid after dark, which stretches of road attract strange lights, and which places make you feel watched, even when you're completely alone. The Stuart Highway isn't haunted in any traditional sense, but it runs through country that has seen immense suffering, frontier violence against Aboriginal people, brutal conditions that killed railway workers and drovers, mining disasters, and disappearances. That history doesn't just vanish. It lingers in towns that feel too quiet, in roadhouses where staff won't work certain shifts, and in the empty plains where travellers see things they can't explain. If you drive the Stuart Highway, you'll probably be fine. Just don't stop in these 17 towns unless you absolutely have to. And if you do stop, get back on the road before sunset. Have you driven the Stuart Highway and stopped in any of these towns? Did something feel off, or am I reading too much into isolation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from people who know these places. If you found this documentary valuable, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into Australia's strangest and darkest locations. Thanks for watching. Stay alert there.